Are you one of the many California property owners who've had their insurance premiums increase or even cancel? If so, we're going to be sharing some information with you today, some tips that may help you avoid having your premium canceled, maybe some ideas that might also help you reduce your premium costs. With me is Tom Saumur, a longtime California insurance broker. The current California insurance market is faced with all kinds of challenges right now. We've got rising rates, we have policies not being renewed, and insurers actually leaving the state. What's really underlying all this? What are the causes of these issues?
Part of it has to do with rate structure. The insurance commissioner for California has to approve any rate increases, and the companies have to give them proper documentation to justify whatever percentage they're asking for. They're also looking at the hazards. We've had a lot of crime that's taken place in a state, and it's affected what properties are insurable because of the area that you might live in. They look at the surrounding area, brush areas, poses a fire hazard. They look also at the overall condition of the property, the shrubbery, if it's overgrown, the facing of the house, if they've got wood facing, if it's peeling or fading real bad. And the companies will look at that, and they can also surmise that if they neglected the outside, what's going on the inside of the house that might turn into a possible claim. The majority of claims that I encounter are water damage claims, where people neglect to look under the kitchen sink, under the bathroom Pullman, and the lines, water supply lines might be leaking, might be a drain line that's leaking that turns into dry rot, turns into affecting the floor coverings, the cabinet itself, and those are things that the companies look at. Sometimes they'll come in and actually inspect the inside of the house, but not all that frequently. Most of it is the outside. They can tell a lot just looking at the outside. Premise is for the homeowner to show what they call pride of ownership. If the outside of the house looks good, the inside's probably going to look good too. Now, if I have had policies recently that have been non-renewed, and it was for a variety of reasons. Several of them for debris on the roof or trees hanging over the roof. I've had a couple where they've had their swimming pool empty, or they have a spa that they don't have covered or secured in some way. Now, the client has the recourse. If he makes the corrections on those properties, we take the pictures, we submit them to the company, and they look at it. If things have been taken care of to their satisfaction, they'll go ahead and continue.
How are the insurance companies observing these violations or lack of maintenance?
Sometimes they have people that go out and drive around and look at these properties, but here lately they're using drones. They fly around my own property up in the local mountains. They put a drone and look directly down on my roof, and I have an oak tree that probably is 150 years old plus, and the foliage on that tree is probably 30 or 40 feet above the roof. But that's what they're using lately to look at properties.
So one of the big factors that you just shared with us about coverage and determining coverage is maintenance. Are there other criteria that insurance companies look at to determine if they want to write a policy for this individual?
They look at claims. Now, I've had clients in the past that were insured with other companies, and the agent really didn't educate their policyholder. I have one lady that had 4 very small claims. She probably could have taken care of herself and avoided turning those into the company, but yet she turned them in. They were above her deductible, and they paid it out. But the companies are also looking at the frequency of claims. If you have 1 claim, that's not so bad. If you have 2 claims, then you're borderline whether or not they want to keep you. They'll look at the longevity. If they have other pieces of business, like if they have their automobile, they have an umbrella policy, maybe rental properties, all those things kind of factor into what their obligation is to keep that particular household.
So in essence, you're saying you don't make a claim unless it's a big claim.
That's my philosophy. I educate my clients. They'll call me with a claim, and I'll say, well, what happened? Have you had an estimate what the damages are? And we'll look at their deductible. And they go out and get an estimate. The estimate is maybe $3,500, maybe $4,000. And I said, you're kind of on the fence whether or not you want to submit the claim or not. They'll go ahead and pay it, but if something else comes along within the same policy period, then you're going to get your non-renewal notice, because they kind of read ahead into the circumstances. If you let this happen, and sometimes they're not even the client's fault, they're victim of circumstances, but they look at the frequency of these claims. If you have 2 in 1 year, that's, or even 2 within maybe a 2-year period. They're looking for what they call the cream of the crop, the primo business, the stuff that's not going to cost them any money, they can make money on.
Risk averse.
Yeah.
The very tool that we use to handle our risk is also risk averse. How long do these claims follow an individual or a property?
They stay on their record for 3 years at a time. Some companies are looking back as far as 5 years because they'll look back. You can have a claim maybe last year, but you had, say, 2 claims maybe 4 years ago. They'll look at that and they'll want more information on those other 2 claims to see if they in some way are related to the most recent claim that you turned in. Those they can look at as maybe indicators to whether or not there might be a possible future claim.
You had frequent water damage claims. What actions besides maintaining the property can property owners do to lower their premiums or to avoid or hopefully being considered for non-renewal? What additional things can they do?
In terms of rates, they can install a central alarm system in their house that's monitored. Now, I have clients that put in alarm systems, but they're not monitored. Or they say, I'm living in a gated community. Does that gated community have a guard that monitors the traffic in and out? The gated community will turn into a discount and the central alarm will. But if you have a homeowners association where you just type in a code to get it through the gate, they don't consider that. In fact, myself, I have gone into those gated communities. I'll pull up somebody ahead of me. They'll open the gate, I'll go in right behind them. And I have had people stop and question me where I'm going. So I have to know where I'm going, give them an address and everything to allow me to continue on my way.
Having monitored
system.
Anything else?
Those are the primary things that you can get discounts for. But the other thing probably is just bundling your policies. Some people have their policy on their home with one company, they have their car with another company. If you combine these things, not necessarily the rentals, but the car and the home will give you a multi-policy discount. It usually allows, varying from company to company, but it usually amounts to maybe about 15-20% discount.
That's significant.
Yeah.
If someone's policy is canceled, is there any appeal process?
Depends on the circumstances why it's being canceled. I mentioned earlier, if it has to do with the condition of the property and they've made the corrections on the property and we provide documentation, photos, or anything else that they would need to document that, the companies will take it under consideration. And they also look at how long you've been with them, whether or not they want to give it a real consideration. If you're relatively new, they may not want to continue the policy.
All of these cancellations really driven by a cause, neighborhood, condition, number of claims, or are they more arbitrary?
They're also looking at market penetration. They look at zip codes. This happened back in the early 90s with the Northridge earthquake. They had 21st Century had a homeowners policy they provided. They now provide cars, but not homeowners. And what they did, they had too many policies concentrated in a given zip code. It was too much penetration. The companies now are looking at their market penetration based on a zip code. If they have too many policies in a given zip code, they'll start weeding out the ones that are less desirable that may pose a risk.
What happens when a client's policy is canceled, they've appealed, and an arbitrary reason like too many policies in that zip code? How can they get and where can they get covered?
There's a couple of ways they can do it. The California Fair Plan is kind of like the last resort policy. They can insure the house itself for fire, vandalism, malicious mischief, but it does not cover liability, doesn't cover water damage, doesn't cover theft. So they have to get a companion policy to go with it. The 2 policies together comprise what would a normal homeowner's policy would be. But right now, the California Fair Plan is teetering as far as financial stability. So that's another reason why a lot of the companies are looking their penetration given areas, and they're looking at actually the total amount of policies they have on the books, because if this California Fair Plan would fall into financial peril, each company would have to write a check to the state based on the proportionate book of business. And it's a tiered level. They do the same thing with the California Earthquake Plan. It's tiered where each state, each company provides so much money to make up the fund that they use for an earthquake. We haven't had a major earthquake for quite a number of years. The fund is there. The companies are also very concerned because it's been too long and there's been some seismic activity. Some areas are better than others. If you live in Huntington Beach, for instance, there's a lot of sandy soil, so if you were looking to purchase earthquake insurance there, it would be much more expensive than it would be like in Long Beach, or if you go further down the coast where there's bedrock, then it would be cheaper in those areas.
It sounds like this fair plan and a secondary policy be very, very expensive.
It is very expensive.
What happens when a homeowner cannot afford their coverage?
The only thing we probably do is try to pare down the coverage somewhat. The insurance companies want you to insure at least 90% of value. So they look at the size of your house, the square footage of the house, the construction of the house, and they determine what the replacement cost value is to replace from the foundation up. Now, some companies will give you a little more leadway on that. They want 90%, but you could probably go down to maybe 70 to 80% with some carriers. And that cuts down the amount of coverage actually on the dwelling, which is the basis of the premium. They determine what it takes to replace that house from the foundation up. And the other coverages are percentages, like the separate detached garage, the fence, the swimming pool is 10% of that value. Your personal property coverage would be maybe anywhere from 50 to 75% of that. And then they have what they call loss of use, where if you had a loss, live somewhere else, pay expenses, hotel or whatever, that's usually about 20-25% of whether it's dwelling value. So if we pare the dwelling value down and then at the same time raise your deductibles, companies are giving out high deductibles. I have clients on the books that choose to pretty much self-insure. They'll put a $10,000 deductible policy. And I have other people that don't feel comfortable with any more than $500. So the lower the deductible, the more the insurance company is on the risk.
How much would that reduce your policy, your premium?
It depends on the amount. If I were to give you a figure, I'd say it could reduce your rates with a combination of deductibles and paring down the dwelling coverage, maybe about 10%. Maybe 15%.
To take that kind of risk where you've got a huge deductible and then to replace the value of your home, you've also got a substantial amount of out-of-pocket money.
That's right. The other thing that's come into play with the recent fires is your foundation. That was never considered in the formula. The companies determining how much coverage you need to rebuild your house. They always assumed that they would build from the foundation. But the fires, like the recent fires we've had, have compromised the concrete integrity of it. So they're having to go in and replace the foundation itself. This happened back in the early 2000s when they had fires in San Diego and the local mountain. The fires were so intense that it just pretty much turned the foundations to powder.
Wow.
So they had to do that, and there's a substantial expense in demoing that, digging it, the footings, and pouring concrete. And of course, the cost of building materials are going to skyrocket.
I read the other day that the steel tariff will raise the cost of new construction by $9,000. Labor will probably be another as well.
Homeowners policies have built into their policy an inflation factor just for that reason. They know that labor's going to go up, materials are going to go up, so they build it to it. That can vary anywhere from 25% to as much as 100% depending on the carrier.
So Tom, with your experience and as an insurance broker with all your years of experience in California, how are you positioned to help someone whose premium is unaffordable or whose policy gets canceled?
I have a variety of markets that I work with. Since most of these major companies have pulled out of California or restricted writing their policies, I have to go to what they call surplus line companies. They're usually comparable to the fair plan. The rates are going to be higher, but it's a matter of working with these companies to come up with the amount of coverage that would be adequate to rebuild the house. It's pretty difficult in today's market to find what I would call a real affordable policy compared to what major companies are offering. You want to make sure that you keep your policy as long as you can. Don't give the company any reason to look at your property with a microscope or something and find some fault where they might want to send you a non-renewal notice on it.
Excellent. Well, Tom, I always enjoyed talking to you. You have such good advice and so many years of experience, such a wealth of knowledge. I really enjoy it. If you have any questions or need more information, feel free to reach out to either Tom or I. I'm Valerie Condon with Keller Williams Real Estate. Tom Saumur,
Independent broker.
Independent broker. Long-term, long experience. Thank you.
Over 40 years experience.
Hey, thank you.